Welcome to In the Now with Jim Swilley. If we seem very relaxed, it's just because we came out of two meditation sessions. I think we can get right into it. Last time you were here was for our 1 year anniversary, and that's when you were living in Hawaii.
Yes.
And now you are living in
Kansas City.
Kansas City. Just very briefly, tell me, how did we connect? And because I don't remember exactly.
Yeah, so the backdrop is on that 15 years ago, I was in my first rotation in Iraq,
Army?
in the Army, very painful rotation, but it was a lifelong experience. So I returned from that deployment. I was in Louisiana at the time. I returned from that deployment, and I remember watching, I was going through some of the Christian channels and whatnot, and that's when I saw you on the TV channel, and there was he had a sermon there that really intrigued or piqued my interest, and so at that point I became more involved in his ministry, and I thought to myself, well, if I ever get to Georgia, I know where I'm going to service at.
Is that when my show was on in between Benny Hinn and Rod Parsley? Wow, well, that's an interesting hammock. One of these things is not like the other. Anyway, go ahead.
So the Army says, well, hey, following your deployment to Iraq, you're going to Fort Benning, Georgia. So it's a little, it was less than a couple hours drive, and as often as I could, I would make that drive up to Conyers to attend a service. Not every Sunday, but I'd try. And at the time, I was a single parent, so I'd take my son with me. I said, come on, son, let's go. And we'd come up there and make those trips as often as we could.
And even then, when you were in Iraq, I think we were streaming by then, so we still stayed in contact with you. You remember at the big building, there was a picture of it looked like a Middle Eastern-looking shepherd with a lot of sheep. That was a gift, I think it was from Iraq, right?
Yeah, it was actually, yeah. So an Iraqi man actually painted that. I bought that in Iraq, knowing that I was going to have good purpose for it. I didn't know I was going to give it to Bishop Jim, but eventually it was laid upon my heart to do it, and I thought, I had it framed, and it was a beautiful, beautiful product.
So fast forward to why I don't even know why you're in town, but since you are in town, Zach and I we don't talk small talk. I mean, once in a while he'll send me, we're both Beatles fans, he'll send me, a song or something.
Runs through the veins.
And, but usually he'll just send me sometimes very lengthy thing he was thinking of, and I can't say every time, but about 2 out of 3 times that he sends it, it'll be like exactly what I'm about to teach on. And on more than one occasion, when I haven't known the next point I'm going to make, we just have this connection. It's nearly like when you have a connection like that with somebody, you nearly don't want to talk too much in the natural level, because I kind of prefer that. When he sends that, and I'm like, and usually I don't write a lot. It's usually, wow, that's awesome, smiley face. So you're like, yes, we know.
I expect those brief responses as well too.
But it's also like, wow. And then I would, a lot of times I've quoted you and I said, this is like, Zach, if you're watching, and most times he is watching. So he told me he was going to be here today. We're still on the same page, and a lot of the arc of my journey is spiritually has been his as well. So what do you think about me leading everybody in meditation? What do you think about
I think
that?
it's awesome. And I would tell you, for the last couple of years, amazing thing happened to me. A couple of years ago, I was under the knife. I was going through some foot surgery. It was a very stressful time for me. And so in the post-op recovery phase, I was looking for some answers because the drugs weren't working to mask the pain. And the doc told me, he says, I was dealing with plantar fasciitis. For anybody that deals with plantar fasciitis, come see me after this, okay? So, again, very stressful period. My career was in jeopardy. They told me, hey, look, and I was approaching 20 years of service, so I thought, well, if there's not a better time to retire, this might be it. But that wasn't my intent. I wanted to do more time, and I'm still in, by the way. So, a couple years ago, a little over a couple years ago, I was in Louisiana again, and I was going through a month-long training event there. I just happened to be, I was in Alexandria, Louisiana, and I was doing laundry in this facility. And there was a TV up on the ceiling, and I'm looking at it, I'm watching, it's Oprah Winfrey. And she has a gentleman on there by the name of John Kabat-Zinn. I don't know if anybody of you have heard of him, maybe, maybe not. But anyway, he kind of jump-started this thing in the Western society about meditation.
Is he the guy that has the app that you can download on your phone?
That I don't know.
Okay.
That I don't know. So I'm watching him, and I'm like, wow, okay, I really got to get into this, right? So I'm researching. I'm doing some other research in other areas as well, too. And so I come across a book that he wrote forward for by a gal named Dr. Jackie Gardner-Nix, right? And the name of the book is Mindfulness Solution to Pain, okay? Now, when you think meditation, you don't think necessarily meditation to relieve pain, at least for people who experience chronic pain. But very, very elaborate book and very well written. And so fast forward another year, which was last June, 13 months after I was introduced to John Kabat-Zinn, I'm meeting his son, Will Kabat-Zinn,
Wow.
at UC Berkeley, there in the Silicon Valley area. I thought, wow, this is a great experience. And we're going through a meditation piece there as part of our agenda with the seminar I was in. So I thought, wow, that's very profound. So at that point, I became more involved in the meditation process. And I can tell you it has worked wonders. That and a few other things that I'll address here in just a moment. So that's how I got started in the meditation. I don't practice, I'd be lying to you if I told you I practice it on a daily basis, but for as often as I can force myself to say, okay, set aside some time to do it, I will do it, and very beneficial for me. So I will say this, in your experiences, for me, meditation is really the opportunity for you to suspend not just reality, but time. And you are able to experience what it feels like, as far as I can tell, is really like an eternal bliss, a state of eternal bliss. And coming out of that is you're kind of like, you know, again, like you said, it's not like you just snap out of it. It's just, wow, you kind of ease back into it, right? And you feel so much more relaxed. Now, there's a difference between meditative therapy and then, of course, relaxation therapy. Relaxation therapy is intended to, I mean, you're almost in a state of, falling asleep, per se. But this is not, this mindfulness is really another word for being totally aware.
Yes,
Right?
yes.
That's really what it is, a state of awareness. An interesting thing while I'm saying this, and I don't know, it's about 10 years ago, there was a movie that was released, and I think this is so cool. It was a movie, it was called The Forbidden Kingdom, and it starred Jackie Chan and Jet Li. Of course, you can imagine with those two stars in a movie, it's a lot of action and some comedy, what have you. And so there's a young man, I used to play in the Nickelodeon series of whatnot, kids stuff. And anyway, he's the protagonist in this movie. And so they're journeying through the desert, right? They're in a band, a group of maybe 4 or 5 individuals. And they're journeying through the desert. He's the keeper of the staff, right? So this is part of his destiny and what seems to be a dream. And so on their journey to go find the staff, they find themselves under the cleft of a rock in the desert. And the young boy is talking to Jet Li's character, who, by the way, is a monk, bear in mind. He's talking to him, and he says, well, what if we get there and we do this? And he's talking about what he perceives, what may become of him and his destiny. Well, what if we get there and we do this? And what if this happens? And Jet Li responds to him, and he looks at him with a smile, and he says, don't forget to breathe. I thought that was very, very awesome. So the implication is, in the midst of all your turmoil, find a spot, breathe, and find out who you are in the midst of this. Become aware of yourself and your capabilities, your abilities, so forth and so on. It's very, very profound.
What were you telling me the other day? And yes, you're exactly right. Was your grandfather that was a chiropractor?
Yes.
What were you telling me about him?
Yeah, I come from a line of chiropractors. It just happens to be. So my grandfather, paternal grandfather, is a chiropractor. He fought in the Second World War. So shortly thereafter the war, he went to chiropractic school in Palmer Chiropractic College up in Davenport, Iowa, which is where he met my grandmother, who was also going to chiropractic school at the time, but she never practiced. So my father, who is also a chiropractor, went to Logan in St. Louis, Logan Chiropractic College in St. Louis, and then I have a cousin on that side of the family who's also a chiropractor. So needless to say, chiropractic runs in my family. I am not a chiropractor. I don't practice it, but it seems to be that I have a great deal of knowledge about chiropractic. It just happens to be. So in my research, in my studies, well, I will say this while I'm on that. There was an interview done for, he's transitioned 7 years ago almost. There was an interview that was done in the early 2000s, and most of it was, except for the last 3 minutes of the interview, most of it was his experience in time in the Second World War. And the guy who's interviewing him, I don't even know who this guy is, but he's interviewing him, and he says, well, what can you tell me about living in a state of holiness, right? So we talked about holiness as the state of mind. And he really surprises me because I had no idea that he was on this plane. And he says, the first thing he says, he points to his mind, he says, it's all in here. Now, he wasn't saying that pain is imaginary, because we do experience pain. But how do we arrive at that state of pain, and how do we deal with it, right? So it really does have to do with a state of wholeness. And in line with what Dr. Gardner-Nix was writing in her book about mindfulness solution to pain is that we have a tendency, meditation is really medication. The difference is in those actual words, and really this is a play on words, is T in meditation is for thought, whereas in medication, the C is for chemicals.
What?
Chemicals
What?
that you absorb, right? Orally,
That was worth you driving here today.
right? So
Did you make that up?
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay, because I was going to be
That's
like,
actually in her book. I didn't make that.
I was like, no, you did not. I'm sorry, go ahead.
The difference is medication. When we take medication, right, so we're looking for an instant fix, right? Something to mask that pain. We need it right away because I've got to proceed on as life as usual, right? Whereas meditation has a more prolonged and enduring or profound effect on the body than does medication. And plus, and if you're a physician or a doctor, please don't take this the wrong way. Coming from a background of chiropractic, there's always been this war between chiropractic
right.
and whatnot, and and there's a reason for that, and I won't go in depth as to why. But there is, there's money in big pharma, right? It's a big sell. But you'll find more often than not, and I'm not saying if you're on medication, by all means, don't go home and say,
right.
Zach told me not to take it. By all means, if that's your prescription and
right.
the doctor's prescribed, take it. But I would urge you to practice as often as possible meditation because it does send your body into a trajectory on a road to self-recovery, to self-healing. So we have chiropractors in here? Yes, we have one back. Great,
That's
awesome.
my chiropractor. But
So anybody who's been to a chiropractor would understand, and you would know that when you get your treatment, right, it allows the body, you're realigning your spinal piece, your spine. It allows the body to go about into self-healing because your body is always looking for ways to heal itself, right? Meditation is the same thing. What happens is when you find yourself in a state of chaos, right, you're really experiencing a chaotic imbalance of chemicals in the body. When you go into a state of meditation or a state of awareness, you're really reconstituting those chemicals. Right? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. That is so good. I've got a couple more minutes. Tell me, when you send me something, where does that come from? When I look on my messenger and I see it's Keough Zach up there, I'm like, I always know it's going to be something good and positive. Where does that come from? Is that just something that you have been thinking about? Like, why do you communicate with me that way?
Wow, because it's because I know here in this congregation, if you will, in this body of believers, I know that there is openness, right? So I can share things, and especially with you, I can share things and not get some kind of feedback like, that's ridiculous. Where'd you get that from? Which is often the responses that Jesus got, right? Which was, where do you get this stuff from, So it feels good to be in a community of believers where you can express how you think, how you feel, so forth and so on, and not receive that kind of response, like you're being non-judgmental, right? So while I'm thinking of this, so that the Greek word for meditation is meleteo, right? M-E-L-E-T-A-O, meleteo. It's only found in the New Testament twice. Mark 13:11, in which Jesus says, he says, if you find yourself captive, he says, don't think on these things or don't meditate on it. Don't rehearse these things. Just say whatever comes to your mind. to my point.
Really?
The other
That's
one
the word
is,
used? I didn't know
well, I'll
that.
tell you, yeah. So in the other instance in Scripture is in 1 Timothy 4 and 15, which Paul is exhorting Timothy's command and teach these things, so forth and so on. And he says something to the effect, he says, dwell on these things, right? He's talking about the gifts. He says, dwell on these things or meditate on these things. We find that more often in the Old Testament. I don't know if maybe there is, if Jews in the Old Testament were more adamant or had ingrained in them to do meditation.
Well, they weren't under the rule of the Roman Empire, so that might have been less that distraction. I don't know.
Absolutely. But in Psalm 4 and 4, and I know you brought this up last week, Psalms 4 and 4, it talks about meditating, laying on your bed. Let me talk about that for just a moment. And especially listen up if you experience plantar fasciitis. What I've experienced and what I found out, and this is my own research, and coming across numerous physicians, some of which are very famous. If I told you who they were now, you'd be, oh yeah, I've heard of this guy or that gal. When you lay upon your bed, part of the reason why you can't sleep at night is maybe because you don't have enough time or make out enough time for you to meditate or for you to self-reflect or inflect, right? So you don't create that time for yourself. It's not that there's not enough time during the day, because there is. You just don't take the opportunity. Maybe you don't see the value in you doing that, right? And it's very easy to get caught up in our busy lives, our busyness lives, right? It's too easy. But in that particular passage, laying on your bed, very difficult for some people, especially those who experience insomnia, right? Let me share with you the thing that has helped me tremendously. And there is, in this particular item that I'm about to mention, and it's not something that's trademarked or anything, it's a mineral, not a drug, it's a mineral called magnesium. Some of you have heard of it, right? Some of you may even take it. But I will tell you, what most Americans, maybe not just Americans, but most people suffer from is a lack of magnesium in their body. And it has such a profound effect on the brain,
Wow.
the different parts of the brain, right? Your frontal cortex, your amygdala, the list goes on. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, so don't quote me on a lot of these things, right? But there is a profound effect on what the part of the brain called the hippocampus, right? And I don't know if maybe that's where the label or the title for that particular part of the brain comes from Hippocrates, the ancient Greek philosopher, who discovered, by the way, and Tim LaHaye did a study on this maybe 20 years ago about the 4 temperaments, right? He just basically took Hippocrates' study on the 4 different predominant types of temperaments, and he expounded upon them. Very interesting study, to which I still kind of hold dear. I think it's probably the one legitimate product Tim LaHaye did.
I ain't going there with you.
So, but anyway, so it has, the bottom line is, and I want to get into specifics about it, but it does have a very profound effect on the brain, which, by the way, the brain transmits what we call neurotransmitters, right? The magnesium helps those, what do I want to call them?
Neuropaths?
Not neuropaths per se, but it's a chemical, right?
Thinking stuff?
Neurotransmitters are chemicals, right? So it helps carry those chemicals throughout your nervous system, right? Magnesium also is a natural muscle relaxer, in case you don't know. You ever been to a little kid's baseball game or a basketball game especially where, they're exerting lots of energy. And after the game, the coach gives everyone a banana. You know why? Because bananas are rich in magnesium. It's a natural muscle relaxer. Anybody have kids, infants, toddlers? Bananas are an excellent source. If you want to keep them to bed at night, give them a banana before they go to bed.
That's a word of knowledge for somebody. Man, I gotta have you. If you're back next week, I might.
I will be.
Calvin Witcher here, but I might sneak in another one with him because that's some really good stuff. Would you tell Zach how much we appreciate him being here today? Good man, good man, and thank you for your service to our country. We appreciate that. God bless you. Thank you for being with us on this edition of In the Now with Jim Swilley. Love you. God bless you. Metron, tell the In the Now audience we love them. Mwah. All right. That's good stuff. Good stuff. I wish we had more time.
feeling it?